Power Maths, and then we've got some parents with just younger girls for whom this is.
Mrs. Raffrey, you're muted.
You've gone on to mute.
I muted myself. Mrs. Sandwich, did you mute everybody, including me?
No, I think I accidentally muted you. I do apologise, Mrs.
Like, oh, we've
Raffrey.
had enough of her chat. So fantastic. I think in a moment we will make a start. It's really lovely to see so many of you. We ran this evening last year, and actually we knew it'd be good to run it again because for a lot of people, the way maths is taught now is completely different to the way they were taught when they were children. And to reassure you, maths is now often the most popular subject in school. And I'm so delighted about that because that was not the case a few years ago, was it? Certainly not the case for girls. So we now no longer make jokes about girls not making maths. I actually have a big sense of humour failure when people do that because I just think it's really inappropriate. The girls love maths here, and that is down to the leadership of Mrs. Catigan, I have to say, because she has introduced Power Maths to the juniors and now to the preps. One of the amazing things that we see in action is when we compare the girls coming through the school, their fluency in maths and their ability to describe what they're doing, their versatility, they're able to, they have a massive agility in the way they're problem solving, which is new. And we see that in spades when we compare our girls with external girls when they apply for 11+ scholarships and 9+ scholarships, because we give them the problems. And as I say, the agility of our girls is absolutely outstanding. So that's quite enough for me. I hope you really enjoy the session. Hope you're inspired by it. I know the girls are. I know they really enjoy it. And I'll hand you over to Mrs. Catigan, and I'm going to say goodbye. I'm off to see governors. So have a lovely evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mrs. Raffrey. I'm going to share my screen. I've prepared a presentation, so there's a lot of information on the presentation, and I'm on the slides, and I'm going to talk around it. So the main purpose of this presentation is to talk about how we teach maths in the junior school. We've introduced Power Maths 2 years ago. This is now our third year of Power Maths, but our first year of Power Maths in preps, which is really exciting. So why Power Maths? Why did we choose it? It follows a mastery approach, which encourages, for me, what's probably the most important, a growth mindset in children. It encourages a can-do attitude, and sometimes we have to work hard in changing some children's mindsets about this inner belief that somehow they can't do maths. So Power Maths, the whole mastery approach it provides lots of connections between different areas, which is one of the ways that children develop a deep and rich understanding of maths at higher levels. And so Power Maths is produced by Pearson, and it's the I can attitude. So we've introduced that 3-letter word yet for children who might start to say, well, I don't understand this. We encourage them to say, well, maybe not yet, but we're going to keep working on it, and you will. So the key aims of Power Maths, quite new approach to how maths has been taught for many years before. The whole class is kept together. Mastery means not putting children into ability groups and defining them by not being in the so-called top set or being in a bottom set. So the whole class moves on together. No one is left behind. Everybody understands a concept before they move on. Those children who progress more quickly we focus on deepening their understanding with providing challenges and problems at a high level for them to deepen their understanding. The programme also comes with regular half-termly assessments and also assessing every day in every lesson with the way that we question children and how they respond. And of course, growth mindset and building confidence in maths. So I won't read through that, but it has been written by experts in mastery teaching, both over in the UK and in China. Importantly, it's one of only 2 mastery schemes that are that's endorsed by the Department of Education, and it's also matches the NCETM, which probably doesn't mean much to most of you, but it is the gold standard of maths teaching in the UK. And it's created specifically for UK classrooms. There is another scheme which is follows the Singapore curriculum, but it's quite clunky and it needs lots of additions to make it fit the UK curriculum. So what we aim for is girls to achieve a deep, long-term and secure understanding of the subject. And they do this through our development of mathematical thinking. A power maths classroom is noisy. There's lots of talking, lots of discussion, lots of finding different ways. One of the most popular questions is, can you find another way? Or even, can you find a better way of working something out? What else is important is each lesson is very carefully sequenced, not just in the lesson design, but within in terms of which lesson follows previous lessons, but also in how the lesson is broken down. Every question moves on in a really small step from the previous bit of learning. So it's a really logical way. One thing changes and the attention is on that. So children aren't blasted with too much information at one time. The programme also focuses a lot on fluency. So I'll explain later how it does that. And of course, you may have heard the children speaking about the approach or read about it, but it's called a CPA approach, where children work with concrete manipulatives, or basically, things, blocks, counters, multi-links, cubes, and they use physical objects to represent their understanding. And then when they're more secure, they can draw a picture, show me how you understand. How can you show this problem? How can you represent it with a model or a diagram? And then finally, when they reach another level of understanding, they move on to the abstract. And of course, a long time ago, it wasn't actually that long, that's how I was taught maths, you go straight to the abstract. So you would just learn a method or a strategy, and without really that deeper understanding of how it started and where it's come from. 5 big ideas. What I want you to focus on is representation and structure. I've just mentioned the mathematical thinking, fluency, and the variation. The 2 different kinds of variation. It looks a bit scientific, but it's really important. We focus on 2 kinds of variation: procedural variation and conceptual variation. Procedure is varying the process. So it varies the problem slightly and extends it by changing the numbers. Conceptual is an opportunity to work on different representations of the same mathematical idea. And both of those approaches provide a really deep understanding that can be transferred from one concept to another concept, can be transferred from one context to another context if we teach them to recognize patterns. So when they're representing the problem, what they're doing is identifying the pattern within the problem that they can then take with them to the next problem along. So variation, a little bit more about that, because it's a really big thing in maths at the moment, and it's all about directing the attention of the children. Where do you want your learners to attend to? So what we do, and what Power Maths does so well, is only one thing is changed at a time. So if one thing is changed, that's where the attention is on, and they're more likely to notice it. So if we look at that, it helps with an example. So how can we help children see mathematical structure? So we start with what we call deliberate variation. So once again, we're moving away from just being given a textbook with just a whole bunch of abstract questions for them to answer. Each question has been really carefully thought through, and the next one even more so. So we're looking at what the next question here might be. So we encourage the children to look at what is the same, what is different, and then they look at the outcome, and it encourages discussion. It leads to different thinking. So what could the next question be? So we move on by holding constant as much as possible and varying just one element at a time. It means we direct the children's attention to that one thing that has changed. And then they look at the change, and sometimes there is no change. And then that gets them talking again. And because each question is related to the one that comes before it, then children begin to form expectations of what's going to happen next. It makes children think more deeply about the processes involved. And you can see that this kind of teaching and this kind of structure really encourages children to have to think hard, and it stops them cruising through on autopilot, which many of you might be familiar with. You become a little bit overconfident and you stop thinking about what you're doing. It becomes routine. It's one of the most popular, I'm always saying in my class, you know, what is the same, what is different? It really encourages them to identify patterns in what they're doing. So another way that we do this is we provide an example and a non-example type of comparison. So here we have a subtraction of two-digit numbers, and one of the answers is correct, one of them is incorrect. So not only do they have to identify the correct answer, they have to work out what the mistakes could be that the person has made who's come up with the incorrect answer. And then they have to, you know, one way we could do is say, well, show me what mistake they could have made and what advice would you give them? So we can see here, I think most children would quite easily recognize mistakes, certainly at the upper end of Key Stage 2, because this is one of the most common mistakes made when using a mental strategy to solve this. They would say 90 subtract 50, and then they would just switch these round to make it work. So the difference, just finding the difference between 7 and 5 and then adding. Then we ask them to come up with some advice. How would you solve it? And we introduce, and actually I was speaking to the Year 2 teacher this week, and she was saying that they're introducing already, which is really quite remarkable, partitioning, but also non-standard partitioning, because you can see at this level the importance of having that understanding. So to recognize, instead of partitioning 95 into the 10s and the 1s, it's partitioning it in a different way. You can partition the 95, well, here you've got, again, the 90 split into 10 and 80. But what you're doing is you're partitioning this into 80 and 15. So it's non-standard. And if you do that, then it becomes relatively straightforward to subtract 50 from 95 and then 7 from 15. This leads at the top end of Key Stage 2. This is how we teach children when they're subtracting fractions, when they're subtracting mixed numbers, and the fractional part of the number in the number they're subtracting is greater than the fractional part of the first mixed number. If they're confident with non-standard partitioning, it helps them partition that first mixed number into a smaller whole number and a greater fraction. So children explore how to solve things in novel, unusual, different ways. It's not boring. There's no end really to a strategy that you can use. And children are encouraged for speaking in full sentences, explaining their understanding using mathematical vocabulary, so that as they move up the school, the vocabulary is consistent and they become more confident in using it. So here's some examples of what you might hear a child say with a fixed mindset in terms of maths. It might even have been things that you find yourself saying or have said yourself. I've certainly got friends who are quite happy telling me that they've never been any good at maths at school. And yet they would never say that about English or reading or writing, but somehow it's okay to say that about maths. What we encourage is, yes, maths can be hard sometimes, but if I keep on trying and I try hard, I know I will improve. To understand, if you keep trying, you'll get better at something. And most importantly, celebrating mistakes. This is probably the hardest thing that we do as teachers of maths, is children have this idea that if they've made a mistake, it's something to be ashamed of and to hide, but we celebrate them and we bring them out into the open. Because the more that they realize, I've learned something from this mistake, the more that they face it without embarrassment or a feeling of failure. And I myself make mistakes, sometimes not on purpose. And I have a maths police badge that the children sometimes call the maths police on me. And I think it's really healthy for the children to see that, you know, I make mistakes too, and it's not that embarrassing, and I've learned from it. So I thank them for pointing it out to me. So these are quite fun. We have the characters in Power Maths, and what I really like about it is the characters that are in the textbooks and the practice books grow up with the children. They each have a characteristic, and they say things that certain children will relate to, and you want them to kind of understand and relate to them. So here they are, sorry, in reception. They're very cute in reception. Hang on, sorry. Oh. I'm going to just click through and just have a look at how they grew up. Okay. Sorry, there's something I wanted to say at this point. Okay, so their characteristics remain the same throughout as they grow up. Dexter is determined, Flo is flexible, Ash is curious, and Astrid is brave. I think girls in preps have all been given bookmarks. I've had feedback from teachers, and they say the children really enjoy having their bookmark and that they're beginning to identify with the character they've been given. The main point of them is that they encourage that growth mindset. Can we do it differently? Let's try again. And it's brilliant when the children start repeating that to each other, because they're getting it throughout every single stage, every single year of the textbooks. If we have a look, I won't go too much about how it's broken down, but each, you've got the year groups and you've got the units, and each unit is a core concept, which is then broken down into lessons. As I mentioned before, each lesson follows a sequence, a really small process, a little jump in learning. It's called blocked learning because it means you spend a long time on one concept before moving on to another one. No more do we move on with only half the class and with the other half of the class thinking, well, I never got that, I never understood that. We remain with that unit, so it's a flexible way of teaching. Some units can be taught quickly if the children move through it quickly, and if we need to. So for example, I've been teaching rounding. It was supposed to be in one lesson, but we spent 2 days on it. because there was a little bit of hesitancy with quite a few children. Those who were confident moved on to some more challenging problems where they had to apply their understanding, whereas some of the children who were less confident, we went back to basics and we used models and diagrams, place value grids, number lines, so they could show me what rounding actually means and they can explain it to me. In reception, it's slightly different. So for those of you who've got children in reception, interestingly, they share the same, they're broken down in the same way as the lessons in the upper part of the school, but whereas our lessons take about an hour, in reception, they take about a week. So the starter activity would be in the first day, discover and share, day 2, etc. So we have same-day intervention. That's another key principle of mastery, where children are identified in the lesson as those who might need extra support. Time is found during the day to speak to them, whether it's maybe at the start of another lesson or during lunchtime registration. Often in the morning, I will have their book out and I will have time in the morning to speak to them and address an issue that I think that they might have, to make sure that when we move on to the next lesson, they've been spoken to, they've had an extra teaching input, they might work through an example with me. And to facilitate that, I have coloured trays in my classroom where the children put their practice book where their level of confidence is. So any books in the red or the orange tray, which is, I'm really not sure, I'm okay, but I might need a little bit of extra help, I make sure that I speak to them on the same day, or certainly before the next lesson. It's all about the class keeping up, not catching up, which is a really big difference. So let's see. So this each unit starts with a unit starter, where we identify any continued misconceptions from when they last looked at this unit, so numbers to 100, we check for any misconceptions about number or any gaps in understanding. And if we need to, we can take groups and plan and deliver interventions, or in some cases, we might reteach, especially with the pandemic, we might find that there's something being missed from a previous year. So we go back to that year and we will teach that. So for example, there's just a group teaching place value, like I've been doing, to numbers up to 10 million, if they're not secure with place value up to 1 million, or place value within numbers up to 100,000. So you use this to check for understanding, and this is built into every lesson. It also introduces the vocabulary that's going to be used, and also the models, the representations, and all of the tools that they will have throughout that unit. We then have the fluency. I mentioned fluency earlier, and Mrs. Raffrey mentioned it at the beginning. With blocked learning, what you need to do to make it so successful is you have to keep providing opportunities for revision, for retrieval practice. So regular retrieval practice for the children at the start of every lesson, as well as practice with number facts, times tables, number bonds, all of that improves their fluency. There's a bit of a miscommunication about misunderstanding, sorry, of fluency, thinking it's just about recalling times tables facts, but it's also about remembering how to do things, about remembering strategies, remembering processes, remembering methods, and being able to apply them. So throughout the year, every lesson begins with a fluency starter that might look at something that was taught in a previous unit or a previous term. And that regular retrieval practice is so important for children at the end of the year. It means that they're much more likely to remember it more quickly than if they hadn't had that practice. We then move on to discover and share. This is wonderful. This is the really noisy part of the lesson. It encourages mathematical discussion and exploration. Here in this example, you've got children shown the pictorial representation of place value counters here, alongside the more abstract method of short division. So you can see here, this is the second lesson with the same learning objective, following on from the lesson from the day before. And they now make the link where previously they would have represented the problem with counters. They're now shown the abstract and they begin to make that link. And you can see that this encourages deeper understanding rather than going straight to the abstract, teaching them almost like a trick to just learn it without actually thinking about what it is that they're doing. So everything is aimed at really deep understanding. So here we've got, so powerful ways of acting spring from powerful ways of seeing. It's very visual. It really helps them. And those who are less secure can go back to the counters, make it and break it down again so that they are more confident going back to the abstract method. We then move on to the think together part of the lesson. This is where the teacher guides children through a series of problems as a class, both with partners and also independently. As the questions go on, they increase in difficulty and some of the scaffolding or some of the support is withdrawn. So lots of visual clues here, then moving to a more abstract problem here. In reception, in the reception class prep 1, the teacher uses the think together question to spark discussion and consolidate understanding before the children undertake practice activity in their journal. Our practice in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 moves seamlessly on from the textbook lesson work, and once again, each question just varies one small element, using the variation again to move children on in their thinking. The challenge question, you can't see that there, but there's always a challenge question, which is the last question. It's probably number 8 on the other page. It links to other areas of math, so it really encourages children to think hard and remember things they've learned before. It takes their understanding to a greater level of depth. Children who move quickly through here and complete the challenge question are then offered other challenges of greater depth. When they have a maths jotter that they stick that in. It's usually on a piece of paper. They stick it in and that's pitched at an even higher level, and then they work through that in their books. And then we end with the reflection, and it's an opportunity for children to review, to reason about what they've learned, and also an opportunity for the teacher to check for understanding once again. They're encouraged the quality of their explanations. They need to write in full sentences, they need to use mathematical vocabulary, and they're encouraged to do that. I use this as a plenary at the end of my lesson, where I bring the whole class together and we talk through it and we listen to everyone's ideas, and then they have a go completing that on their own. At the end of unit, we have a check. Once again, it's an opportunity for the teacher to assess whether children have mastered the concepts. Those who haven't can be worked with in a group where there are some activities that we would use to strengthen their understanding. Those who we can see are confident. Likewise, we have greater depth challenges to deepen their understanding. So there is differentiation built in throughout the whole process. So no child is left bored and no child is left struggling. It's a very effective way of teaching maths. Once they're done, the one before was in the textbook, this one is actually written in their practice book. So there's lots of ways of checking the level of each child at the end of each unit. So just to summarize the key strategies, the discover and share section follows I do, we do, you do. So I do, I model it, I teach it. The first question. The second question, children are encouraged to work with me and work with a partner to solve it. And the final part of Discover and Share. Sorry, this is a Think Together section, sorry. The final part of that is independent work. And that's where we can really see the children who then can move on to the practice book quickly. So it's really watching all the children carefully to see where they are with their level of understanding. The children work together, we keep them together, lots of talk and discussion, lots of independent.
Showed that they already had around 72 or something.
The role of practice is really important, and they get lots of that before moving on to the next unit. Really important that children answer in full sentences. It's all too tempting for a teacher just to accept the answer, and all too easy for children to offer it. But we've really got to encourage children to speak in full sentences, because by speaking in full sentences, repeating the question in a way before answering it, it helps everyone else in the classroom, because they're reminded of what the question was and they get to listen to another explanation. Every child speaks in my class. Every teacher I know follows this principle. No child sits at the back without a voice. And again, the language and vocabulary, as I mentioned before. I'm going to whiz through those. These are some of the models and representations that we use in teaching. You might not be familiar with those. Actually, I'll go back. So listen out for your children talking about part-whole models, which is a way of representing partitioning, how numbers can be split into parts. An important thing here is we move towards non-standard partitioning, so that we can, and understanding that partitioning just means breaking down a number into different parts. It doesn't always have to be tens and ones or hundreds, tens and ones. We can partition in different ways. Bar models is something that the children might be new to some children, but with repetition in every single year group, they get really confident. And I actually love, I find if I'm finding something quite challenging, I put it on a bar model and it really helps me see what I have to do to solve it. So you've got pictures, replacing those with counters, and then eventually replacing those with numbers. So concrete, pictorial, abstract, getting the children standing in hoops, using counters, and then using the numbers. So slight difference from Fluency, but linked is memorizing key facts. We emphasize the importance of this. It's huge. So we have the power-ups. We also use something called Flashback 4, which is much quicker. Children are given about 2 minutes to answer these 4 questions just on whiteboards in the classroom. So it's like a no risk. They don't worry about getting it wrong because it's just on a whiteboard, they can rub it off. But you can see quite easily by whizzing around the classroom and seeing what they're doing, how confident they are. We have, of course, got our times tables rock stars, which I hope your children are using at home regularly. It is encouraged that they practice a little bit every day. And of course, you will have just received this term's key instant recall facts, which is really important all the way from Prep 1 all the way up to Upper 2. Every day, 5 minutes. Children should be able to recall these facts within about 3 seconds. They should have instant recall, and it can be done if they practice every day. I'm just going to finish by just explaining how we're learning so much about mastery. Both myself and Mrs. Costello, who's a Prep 2 teacher, we are part of a local maths hub, and we're in our 3rd year of implementing mastery teaching in our schools. So we're now moved into the sustaining phase. So everything we're doing is backed up by research, and we get a chance to talk to lots of other teachers and maths lead in other schools across London. So it's really research based and comes from a really secure level of understanding and professional practice. And finally, we have seen the change just in the 2 years. I know Mrs. Rafferty mentioned it, but it really is lovely to see the confidence with which girls are answering and discussing and speaking in full sentences. and being, not afraid to explain their reasoning. I can see their understanding of mathematics is becoming really strong through this style of teaching. Before, it was really common for children to over-rely on one method. And so whatever the problem, they would always use the same method because it's the one they knew, the one they liked. And now with this constant encouragement, try a different way. Is there a better way? What way has your partner used? Can you compare them? Which is more efficient? It really gets them thinking. So I hope your children are really loving their Power Maths lessons. And I hope that gives you a little bit of an insight into how we teach it and what they're actually doing in the classroom. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. There's just a few questions in the chat, and so if we group them together, just for common themes. So there's one about with the progressing together approach. They're concerned that the class will progress at the lowest common denominator rather than being challenged and moving forward at an individual pace. So that's to do with them working together.
Okay.
Longer.
Yeah. Well, I explained earlier, but I'll go over it again because we don't keep it at the lowest common denominator. What happens is there's two approaches. There is a strengthening approach and a deepening approach. So the class proceed at the same pace, but obviously within that, there will be girls who will work much quicker and there will be girls who will work much slower. The expectation in the practice book lesson is we don't expect all children to finish every question, but we do expect all children to complete a minimum of 3 questions. So we don't hold the girls who finished and are then moving on. Remember, when they finish their challenge question, they then have access to a whole range of greater depth problems it's very independent. They know when they finish, they get up, they go over to where they're all kept and they look for ones for that lesson and they choose them and they go back and continue working. No one is just sitting there not doing anything. Meanwhile, the girls who might be finding it more tricky work with a partner, they might work with me, and like I say, as long as they complete a minimum of 3 questions, then I know that they are secure in that. They won't be working at greater depth, but they will be secure at that level, and then we move on. So we're not waiting for everyone to reach greater depth because obviously that's unrealistic. But what we do is we wait for everyone to be secure. And whilst we're doing that, remember, within the same lesson, or maybe pushed over into 2, then the girls who are already confident are deepening their understanding and are being exposed to really rich, interesting problems that they can sink their teeth into. So it's actually a good opportunity for them to get even more confident and being able to apply their understanding in different ways. So we would never hold a class back for days and days and days, just because there might be like 1 or 2 who really struggle. What we would do is we would have an opportunity to take those girls as a group outside of the class and help them keep up outside of the class so that in the next lesson they're able to move on with the rest of the class. I hope that explains it better than I did before.
And there's specialist intervention as well from our specialist maths teachers, and as Mrs. Cadogan mentioned earlier, the same day intervention for any of those who are struggling in lessons. Another one, Mrs. Cadogan, was about subtraction and addition. So with breaking subtraction and addition down usually takes more time. Do they transition away from these methods when they fully understand the concepts? Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to keep up with the pace expected in mental maths.
So are you talking about using written methods or mental strategies? I'm not quite sure what the...
That's from Nim. Can Nim clarify for us?
Yeah. Mike's left. Let's see. I wonder if I can help.
Sorry, Miss Catigan.
Oh, yes,
Actually,
hi.
I'm not named, but I asked a very similar question.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
basically, for me, the method seems quite lengthy. So I was thinking, let's say a day in an assessment, or they have to think quickly. Isn't it easier to just put them underneath each other and subtract, rather than, you know, wasting a bit of time by the time they break it down? So once they understand the numbers, obviously the tens, the units, and whatever method they use, can't they just use the old-fashioned,
Yeah. Well,
as I
actually,
call it, old-fashioned method
I'm really
of
glad
taking
you
them
raised
away
that
from
question.
each other?
Well, no, you see, the thing is, we want to move away from that, because let me give an example. So, for example, there was a girl in my class who was adding something like, I know, 35,000 onto 400,000, and she lined them up as a written addition to work them out, because she didn't recognize that all she had to do was put them together. And so this is what I mean by an over-reliance on the written method. They see an addition. So if you just encourage a written method, what it means is that children fail to recognize when actually numbers work and can be solved in your head. And having the ability to do that leads to mental agility and a mental fluency of maths. It helps children see numbers, and it shuts down that creativity if all children do is line them up. Now, don't get me wrong, we do plenty of, you know, because we are moving on to addition and subtraction written methods, and we will be spending time with the girls, but we teach them when would you use a written method and when would a mental strategy be more efficient, because that's what mathematicians do. They always look for the best method, the most efficient way to work things out. And so having practice when the numbers are fairly simple means that when numbers get more complex, they can call upon those strategies and say, would this work if I did this? And if not, then fine, I'll do a written method. But we would encourage children to use written methods when there is exchanging between columns, because then it can become difficult if you're trying to do it in your head. And one thing we do is we show them lots of different calculations, and we say, right, choose which ones would you work out using a written method and which ones would you work out in your head. And having that skill gives them that number sense that we want, that confidence with number and being able to manipulate it and kind of own it, if you like. And just teaching, you know, it just leads to an over-reliance on a written method, and it kind of takes away the creativity from maths as well. The kind of, I mean, the fun thing, the way, how many different ways can I work it out? Can I work it out quicker than my partner? Is there a different way? Do we still get the same answer? And if not, why not? And it just encourages discussion as well. But I see what you're saying.
I understand the part that you have to understand the numbers and understand, you know, what is it. But I'm not. Maybe I just me. I don't understand how is that better than still, you know, in a situation when you have to do something quickly. Maybe it's just in my mind. Maybe we talk about two different things. For me, it seems so lengthy. So once you understand
with practice, it doesn't, because the one I show, the example that I show, it was just partitioning a number in a different way so that you could subtract. If you can remember, I think it was like, I can't remember now what it was.
Yeah,
but
it was like 80, 70, take away 29.
Was it 95 minus 47 or something like that? And if you look at that, I mean, I know it seems complex because it's new to you, and when it's new to children, it's complex to them. But when they get practice with it, and how wonderful is it to look at a number like 95 and not just see it as 90 and 5, but see it as 80 and 15, and then use that to work that out much quicker. So 80 subtract 50, 15 subtract 7. It might seem complex, but the more they practice it, then it can be applied to bigger numbers, it can be applied to different areas of maths, and it gives them that speed of working things out, so that when maths starts getting really complex in senior school, they're able to work that out quickly and focus on the new learning, rather than trying to do a quick written mental subtraction or addition whilst everyone else is moving on. So they're trying to work something out that other girls are able to work out in their head, and they've moved on. So it's just encouraging them, and it does work. And the more they do it, it gets quicker and quicker and quicker. I promise. You don't believe me, but we haven't done a lot of that yet. So this is new, but it is. I've been to quite a few maths conferences where this is always discussed, about teaching children to not look at numbers in such a simple way, to understand that partitioning means just breaking them down into lots of different ways to make calculating with numbers more efficient and simpler.
And something that we will share with you, some of our Key Stage 2 pupils, together with Mrs. Cadogan, have produced videos of them actually using some of these methods, and we'll be sharing them with parents, and you can see it in action, and them talking through their thinking and explaining the processes that they're going, and you can see there how they really do understand the concepts and can explain it to others. Also, we've recorded the presentation this evening, so that will be shared with all of you and those that couldn't make it, so you can see the presentation again, and so that you can go back and view that as well. Just one more question has come in on a different topic. Can I ask why Power Maths and not one of the other maths mastery programs? So there was only 2 that have been nationally approved, as Mrs. Cadogan said. And actually, we all felt that Power Maths was the one that was best for the children, the best fit. She described the other one as a little bit clunky, and the one that we have gone with doesn't need any additional resources. Everything that we need is contained in that scheme.
Well, to be honest as well, it's also published by Pearson, and Pearson as a company is one that has a great reputation, and it's one that's used throughout the whole of the school. A lot of textbooks are schemes of work are used by the senior teachers as well. But I've had experience with the 2, mate. The other one is Maths No Problem, and I've been in a school and observed, and it's very, very similar, to be honest. But I just liked the Pearson approach, and their online, their online sort of material is really high quality. I really liked it.
There's another question about the Schofield and Sims books, and there has been a delay from the supplier, so that's why we're late getting those. But in the meantime, there is another one.
Yeah, they've all come in. Everyone's got their Schofield and Sims books now.
And can we just stress just to do the pages that are set by the teachers, and not to feel the temptation to rush ahead with those? If you want to do more, absolutely, then please do the curves. We really support parents wanting to work more at home with maths, so the curves which are sent out, Numbots at Key Stage 1, or Times Table Rockstars at Key Stage 2 to supplement maths as well.
The more they do of that, the better. It is. I can't emphasize how important it is for them to be able to recall those number facts as instantly as they can. It just means as they go up through the school, it frees up working memory to be able to focus on the actual new learning, rather than trying to remember a times tables facts or how many centimeters in a meter. They're able to keep up, because a lot of children fall behind because they're struggling to remember number facts that have been taught them previously.
Lovely. Thank you, everybody. For Times Table Rockstars teachers, if you are having difficulty, if you contact your form teacher, and they will get in touch with Mrs. Cadogan and the IT department with that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Cameron.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.